At 30,000 feet, when everything appeared routine, a black teacher was suddenly humiliated, her dignity shattered, and her identity irrevocably altered. In that single degrading moment, long-buried secrets of her life emerged, casting harsh light on dark truths. Discover how that fateful instant reduced her honor to dust and ignited the beginning of a transformative, unyielding journey. What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me. This is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. The rain hammered softly against the small, oval windows of the airplane as it sliced through a sea of dark clouds. Inside the cabin, the low hum of the engines provided a steady counterpoint to the distant rumble of thunder. The overhead lights cast long, wavering shadows across rows of tired faces, each passenger lost in their private thoughts. There was an air of expectancy tonight, as if the flight itself carried a secret that no one could quite name. Mia moved along the narrow aisle with practiced grace, her eyes alert despite the monotony of routine. As a flight attendant, she had seen her share of unusual passengers and quiet dramas unfolding in cramped spaces, yet tonight something felt different. There was an undercurrent of tension that seemed to vibrate just beneath the surface of every conversation and every silent glance. Her uniform, crisp and perfectly ironed, seemed to glow in the dim light, a beacon of order amid the soft chaos of human emotions. At seat 14B, near the window, sat Aisha, a teacher known among her colleagues for her passionate commitment to her students. Her calm exterior belied an inner strength and a well of quiet determination. Aisha's eyes, deep and thoughtful, flicked between the dark horizon and the gentle sway of the plane. She clutched a worn leather bag close to her side, a repository of memories and responsibilities. In her world of lesson plans and hopeful classrooms, tonight she carried a different kind of lesson, one that fate was quietly scripting in the back of the cabin. As the flight ascended, the quiet murmur of conversation mixed with the soft clinks of utensils and the occasional laugh from a nearby family. Yet every so often, Mia caught sight of a furtive glance exchanged between strangers, a silent acknowledgement of the storm, both outside and within. It was in these moments that the true character of the journey revealed itself, a journey not measured in miles, but in the fleeting, fragile connections between souls adrift in the night. Mia paused by the galley, refilling a cup of steaming coffee, and for a brief moment, her eyes met Aisha's. There was no harsh word or heated exchange in that look, only a shared awareness, as if both understood that the night held more than just the promise of a routine landing. The gentle smile on Aisha's face hinted at resilience, a quiet defiance against a world that often demanded too much in too little time. And in that unspoken moment, a subtle thread of fate began to weave its intricate pattern. Outside, the sky was a roiling canvas of midnight blues and grays, illuminated by sporadic flashes of lightning. Inside the aircraft, every whisper and every sigh was magnified by the closeness of space and the isolation of their journey. Passengers settled into their seats as if preparing for a long night of introspection and muted fears. Even the flight's soft background music, designed to soothe, only added to the surreal atmosphere, a lullaby for a flight bound by the gravity of unspoken stories. Mia returned to the aisle with a renewed sense of purpose, her steps measured as she navigated between rows of sleeping and restless figures. She had always believed that every face held a story, and tonight she felt the weight of her own chapter intersecting with those around her. In the dim light of the cabin, every small gesture, a raised eyebrow, a hesitant smile, the furrow of a brow, spoke volumes. It was as though the plane had become a microcosm of a larger, more complicated world where emotions ran high, and every interaction carried the potential for unexpected change. Aisha, meanwhile, shifted in her seat, her thoughts drifting back to the classroom where she nurtured minds with gentle authority. There was an irony in the way her calm demeanor masked the inner turmoil of a woman who had faced countless challenges in life. Tonight, the flight was more than a means of travel. It was a temporary sanctuary where every tick of the clock promised a new lesson in fate and human vulnerability. As she traced the patterns of rain on the window with her eyes, she remembered words of wisdom once shared by a mentor, that life often teaches its hardest lessons when we least expect them. In the soft murmur of the cabin, the sound of the captain's voice broke through, a reminder that they were all passengers on a journey that was both literal and metaphorical. The flight would soon cross time zones and continents, but for the moment, the true journey was the one unfolding within the confines of this airborne world. Each person was a traveler, not only in distance, but in the evolution of their inner selves, a journey marked by moments of fear, courage, and the unexpected intersections of lives. Mia's mind wandered back to the brief exchange of glances with Aisha, a moment that felt like the calm before a storm. She recalled a time when she, too, had been a passenger in someone else's story, a silent observer who had once understood that a single moment could alter the course of an entire journey. The memory stirred something deep within her, a reminder that every duty carried with it the potential for personal transformation. In that silent exchange, a promise had been made, not with words, but with the language of shared human experience. The gentle hum of the aircraft provided a backdrop to these inner monologues, and the soft glow of the cabin lights created an intimate setting where every emotion was laid bare. As the plane continued its journey through the turbulent night, the characters within it began to sense that something momentous was approaching. The balance between routine and disruption was delicate, and every heart on board beat in time with the uncertainties of the world outside. Aisha closed her eyes for a moment, letting the soft murmur of the engine and the rhythmic patter of rain wash over her. In that brief pause, she was transported back to memories of a simpler time, when her greatest worry was the lesson plan for the next day. Now, the weight of the world seemed to rest on her shoulders, yet she carried it with a grace that belied the inner storms she faced. The flight, with all its cramped spaces and transient passengers, was a moving testament to the fragility and resilience of the human spirit. As the minutes ticked by, the atmosphere in the cabin grew ever more charged with silent anticipation. The night was not yet over, and the journey was far from predictable. In that suspended moment between departure and arrival, the stage was being set for events that would soon ripple through every life on board. And though no one knew exactly what lay ahead, each soul was bound by the shared understanding that every journey holds its secrets, and every secret its own consequence. The rain outside continued its relentless drumming, a timeless symphony that marked the passage of moments heavy with promise and uncertainty. In the interplay of light and shadow, Mia and Aisha remained as central figures in a narrative that was just beginning to unfold, a story of unexpected intersections, of hidden truths waiting to be revealed, and of a delicate balance between order and chaos. Tonight, in this airborne world, fate had already begun its quiet work, setting the stage for a drama that would soon change everything. The plane sailed steadily through the night sky, its inner world now a stage for quiet battles and personal revelations. In this floating capsule of metal and hope, the lives of Mia and Aisha were about to be drawn together in ways neither could have imagined. Aisha, the teacher, had always carried herself with a dignified calm. Her soft eyes held both kindness and a fierce determination that belied the gentle curves of her face. She was known for her passion in the classroom, for her ability to inspire even the most disinterested student with her clear conviction that every life was a story waiting to be told. Tonight, however, she was not just a teacher but a traveler on a journey that promised change. Aisha's heart beat with the weight of responsibility, not only for the future of her students, but for herself as well. Every lesson she taught was steeped in the hope that education could heal old wounds and build new bridges. Seated by the window, Aisha gazed out at the vast expanse of dark clouds. In her thoughts, she replayed the conversation she had with a colleague earlier that day. The discussion had revolved around the challenges of modern education, the struggle to connect with a generation that seemed increasingly lost. Her mind wandered to the faces of her students, eager, troubled, resilient. This inner gallery of hope and despair was both her strength and her burden. Tonight, as she embarked on what was meant to be a simple journey to a conference in another city, a place where she would share her innovative ideas and learn from others, she couldn't help but feel that fate was conspiring to add another layer to her story. Mia, the flight attendant, was a study in contrasts. On the surface, she projected the polished efficiency expected of her role. Her uniform was immaculate, her movements precise, and her smile, though practiced, often masked an undercurrent of inner turmoil. Mia had spent years honing her skills to manage the unpredictable world of air travel. She was the keeper of order, the calm in the midst of chaos, yet behind her eyes lay secrets and scars that few could guess. Tonight, as she moved down the aisle with purposeful strides, she silently reviewed her inner checklist, a routine meant to keep her emotions at bay. However, there was something in the way she watched Aisha that betrayed a storm of conflicting feelings. In quieter moments between serving drinks and assisting passengers, Mia's mind would wander back to her childhood, a time when every act of kindness was met with warmth, but every act of difference was met with suspicion. She recalled the sneers of classmates and the dismissive tones of adults who never quite trusted her because of who she was. That memory was a bitter pill that she carried with her even now. And tonight, as she crossed paths with Aisha, those memories stirred an inexplicable mix of envy, resentment, and an overwhelming need to be seen for who she truly was. Their worlds, though so different in purpose and passion, seemed destined to collide. Aisha's initial goal was clear: to reach her destination safely and to share her vision of a better, more understanding world, a world where education could serve as a bridge between divided hearts. But fate, as it often did, had other plans. The air around them was charged with unspoken tension, a subtle friction that hinted at deeper issues of pride, prejudice, and personal pain. Aisha, unaware of the inner demons that haunted Mia, simply sought the calm assurance of routine, a moment to gather her thoughts before the important day ahead. As the flight progressed, small interactions between passengers revealed the intricate web of relationships that bound them together, even in transient moments. A kind elderly man offered a soft smile to a young traveler, while a group of friends laughed quietly in the back. But for Mia and Aisha, every gesture held a double meaning. Mia's practiced politeness now felt like a mask that could slip at any moment, and Aisha's serene composure was shadowed by an undercurrent of worry. It was as if the very air of the cabin whispered secrets about what was to come. Mia's inner conflict grew with each passing minute. She was torn between her duty to maintain professionalism and the fierce emotions that bubbled just beneath the surface. In the back of her mind, she wondered if this flight was merely another routine night or a turning point that would force her to confront long-buried truths. Her eyes flickered over to Aisha repeatedly, and in each glance, she saw not just a passenger, but a reflection of what she might have become if she had been allowed to follow her own truth. The bitterness of past injustices mingled with a yearning for redemption, a redemption that seemed ever elusive. Aisha, on the other hand, clutched her worn leather bag a little tighter as the plane encountered a patch of turbulence. The jolt startled her, but it also served as a stark reminder of the uncertainties of life. She had long learned that control was an illusion, that every carefully laid plan could be upended by forces beyond one's command. Yet, her resolve remained unbroken. She knew that her purpose was larger than any single flight or moment of discomfort. With every ripple of the airplane's journey, she reaffirmed her commitment to stand for what was right, even if that meant facing unexpected challenges head-on. In the soft murmur of the cabin, voices blended into a single hum of human experience. Mia's thoughts grew louder with each passing second, and the quiet determination in Aisha's heart began to face a formidable, unseen obstacle. The stage was set for a confrontation, not born out of malice alone, but from the tangled roots of history and personal pain. The teacher and the flight attendant, bound together by circumstance and the inevitability of fate, were poised on the brink of an encounter that would change everything. As the night deepened, the distance between the two women seemed to shrink. Every shared glance, every subtle shift in posture, was a word in a silent dialogue that neither fully understood. Mia's internal struggle was palpable, a clash between her ingrained sense of duty and the raw, unhealed wounds of her past. Aisha, with her quiet resolve and compassionate heart, seemed both the catalyst for and the victim of forces that had long been at play. In that moment, as the plane continued its journey through the turbulent skies, the promise of a new day lay just beyond the horizon. But for Mia and Aisha, that promise was interwoven with the bitter taste of conflict and the possibility of unexpected transformation. Their initial goals, though simple in intent, were about to be challenged by the storm of emotions that swirled around them. Aisha's mission to inspire and uplift was set against the backdrop of Mia's unresolved pain, a collision of ideals that hinted at a struggle for recognition and redemption. The intimate space of the airplane, filled with the quiet hum of engines and the soft rustle of fabric, became a crucible for their inner lives. Each moment carried the weight of unspoken truths and the inevitable clash of personalities that could either break or bind them together. In the interplay of light and shadow, hope and despair, their paths converged, a convergence that would soon erupt into a confrontation neither had foreseen. By the time the cabin lights dimmed further in preparation for landing, the seeds of conflict were sown deep within the hearts of the two women. Aisha's unwavering belief in the power of empathy stood in stark contrast to the guarded, turbulent soul of Mia. And as the plane cut through the dark sky, both women braced themselves for a destiny that was as unpredictable as the flight itself, a destiny that promised to reveal the hidden truths of their pasts and the uncertain promise of what lay ahead. The soft hum of the plane's engines seemed to pulse in time with the rising tension in the cabin. Passengers, previously lost in their own worlds, now found themselves caught in a moment that would soon shatter the fragile calm. It began with a subtle exchange, a whispered remark overheard by those nearby, and the air, already thick with unspoken worries, suddenly became charged with a dangerous energy. Aisha sat by the window, her thoughts drifting between memories of her classroom and the uncertain future that awaited her at her destination. In her quiet dignity, she clutched her worn leather bag as if it were a talisman against the hardships of the world. Across the narrow aisle, Mia moved with a steady grace, though beneath her composed exterior simmered emotions that had long been kept at bay. Both women had their own burdens. Aisha's was the weight of responsibility and the scars left by a society that often misunderstood her, while Mia carried secret memories of past injustices that now bubbled to the surface. It was during a routine round of service that the first ripple of discord began. A soft-spoken passenger, seated a few rows ahead, murmured a comment that touched on issues of race and respect, a comment that, though intended casually, struck a nerve with Mia. She paused in her duties, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly as she tried to dispel the sudden, bitter taste of anger. Unbeknownst to most, that small comment acted like a spark on dry tinder, igniting a conflict that had been smoldering inside her for far too long. Aisha, who had been quietly reviewing some notes on her tablet, suddenly sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Her eyes met Mia's for a fleeting moment, a glance heavy with unsaid words and raw emotion. In that brief exchange, the air between them seemed to crackle with an intensity that neither had anticipated. Mia's face, usually calm and professional, now showed signs of inner turmoil, while Aisha's expression turned to one of cautious concern. It was as if the entire plane held its breath, the normal rhythms of flight pausing for an inevitable confrontation. For a few heartbeats, silence reigned, punctuated only by the soft clatter of utensils and the distant rumble of thunder outside. Then, as if unable to contain the storm within, Mia took a step toward Aisha's row. Her movements were deliberate, and every eye in the vicinity seemed to focus on the space between the two women. In that moment, the underlying conflict, personal, societal, and deeply rooted, burst into the open. Aisha looked up, startled, as Mia's hand, swift and unbidden, came down in a sharp arc. The sound of the slap echoed in the confined space, a sudden and brutal punctuation to the unspoken tension that had built over hours of suppressed emotion. The force of the blow was not driven by a moment of personal hatred, but by years of accumulated pain, a pain that had transformed into a desperate, misplaced attempt at release. For a split second, the world seemed to freeze. The hum of the engine, the patter of the rain against the windows, and even the murmurs of the other passengers all faded into a distant murmur. Aisha's eyes filled with shock and disbelief as she instinctively recoiled from the unexpected strike. The shock on her face was matched only by the tumult behind Mia's eyes, a mixture of anger, regret, and a haunting recognition of the personal demons that had led her to this point. As the echo of the slap dissipated into the stillness of the cabin, murmurs arose among the other passengers. Some whispered in shock, while others stared in silent dismay. A few even began to murmur about the injustice of what had just occurred. It was clear to everyone that the incident was far more than a simple altercation. It was the spark that would ignite a much larger, underlying conflict. Mia's mind raced as she stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. In that moment, the realization of what she had done crashed over her like a tidal wave. The anger that had fueled her act now gave way to a deep, aching remorse. She struggled to reconcile the woman she had tried so hard to be with the tempest of feelings that had just overtaken her. Every step she took afterward seemed heavy with the burden of her own guilt, and every glance from the shocked passengers felt like a mirror reflecting back her inner turmoil. Aisha, though visibly shaken, slowly gathered herself. In the seconds that followed, her initial shock transformed into a quiet determination. Her life had been a series of lessons, both gentle and harsh, and this unexpected violence would not define her. Even as she felt the sting of the slap on her cheek, a part of her recognized that this moment was a turning point. The quiet strength that had always been her shield now emerged as the beacon that would guide her through the storm. With a steadying breath, she fixed her gaze on Mia, her eyes asking silently for an explanation that neither of them had yet found. Outside, the dark skies roiled with an impending storm, as if echoing the turmoil unfolding within the plane. The distant flash of lightning cast brief, eerie shadows across the cabin, foreshadowing the larger conflicts that were yet to come. There was a sense that this was not an isolated incident, but a harbinger of deeper, more pervasive struggles that would soon spill over from a confined space of the airplane into the wider world. The cabin crew, initially stunned by the sudden outburst, quickly moved to restore order. A stern voice crackled over the intercom, urging calm and reminding everyone that safety was paramount. Yet, the damage had already been done. The incident had shattered the fragile veneer of normalcy, revealing the raw, unfiltered emotions that lay beneath. It was a moment that had altered the course of the flight and the lives of those on board forever. As the tension slowly ebbed, both Mia and Aisha found themselves isolated in their thoughts. Mia's face, now a mixture of defiance and despair, hinted at secrets that stretched far beyond the walls of the airplane. Her internal conflict, laid bare for all to see, suggested that the slap was merely a symptom of a much larger inner battle. Meanwhile, Aisha's measured calm began to reassert itself, but not without leaving traces of pain. She knew that this incident would have consequences that might change her life and the lives of those around her. In the lingering silence that followed, subtle hints of what was to come began to take shape. The angry glances from few passengers, the anxious murmurs, and even the distant, almost imperceptible shift in the flight crew's demeanor all spoke of a conflict that would not end with a single act of violence. There was an unspoken understanding that the issues of identity, respect, and personal redemption were far from resolved. The disruptive event had not only propelled the two women into a collision course with fate, but had also set in motion a chain of events that promised to challenge long-held beliefs and force painful truths into the light. The storm outside grew fiercer, and with each flash of lightning, the cabin seemed to be reminded of the unpredictable nature of life. For Mia, the act of slapping Aisha was both a breaking point and a bitter awakening. For Aisha, it was a call to confront not only the immediate hurt, but also the deeper societal rifts that had been quietly festering. As the flight continued through the tempest, both women, now irrevocably linked by the violent moment, braced themselves for the journey ahead. A journey that would force them to confront their pasts, question their present, and face a future rife with unforeseen challenges. In that charged atmosphere, as the airplane cut through the stormy night, it became clear that the delicate balance of peace had been shattered. The events unfolding on that flight were but a microcosm of a larger, more turbulent conflict waiting in the wings, a conflict that would test the limits of compassion, force hidden truths into the open, and ultimately redefine the lives of everyone involved. The atmosphere in the cabin grew heavier as the flight continued its uncertain journey through the storm. In the tense silence that followed the violent outburst, the repercussions of that single, explosive moment began to reveal themselves. Aisha sat rigidly in her seat, still reeling from the shock of the slap. Her heart pounded with a mixture of hurt and disbelief, and she could feel the sting on her cheek as a painful reminder of what had just transpired. She had planned to use this flight as a quiet passage to her destination, a conference where she would share her vision for a more compassionate, unified community through education. Now, that goal was slipping further away with each passing moment. A few minutes after the incident, an authoritative voice came over the cabin intercom, breaking the uneasy silence. The voice belonged to a senior crew member who, with measured calm, announced that an investigation into the disturbance was underway. The words sent a ripple of anxiety through the passengers. It was clear that what had begun as an isolated event was rapidly escalating into something much more serious. Aisha's eyes widened as she listened, each syllable reinforcing the fear that she might now be the unwilling center of a controversy far beyond her control. Mia, the flight attendant, stood near the galley with her head bowed, her uniform now rumpled with the strain of her inner battle. She could barely meet Aisha's eyes, and the guilt in her silent demeanor was palpable. The storm outside the aircraft seemed to mirror the tumult within her, each flash of lightning illuminating the cracks in her carefully maintained facade. Mia had long struggled with buried resentments and the scars of past injustices. In that heated moment, everything she had tried to contain surged forth. Yet now the consequences of that surge were unfolding, and she could feel the weight of accountability pressing down on her. As the cabin crew moved swiftly to manage the situation, a new figure emerged from the back of the plane, a man in a well-worn jacket with kind, steady eyes that carried the wisdom of years. His presence was quiet yet commanding, and he introduced himself as Mr. Rahim, a retired mediator who had once worked to resolve conflicts in some of the most challenging situations. He offered a few reassuring words to the agitated passengers and, with a gentle tone, began to speak with both Mia and Aisha. His calm demeanor cut through the tension, but his subtle questions hinted that the incident was merely the surface of a deeper unrest. Mr. Rahim's intervention provided a brief respite from the immediate chaos, but it also marked the point where the conflict took on a new dimension. In the midst of the swirling emotions and anxious glances, it became clear that the repercussions of that fateful slap would not be easily contained. Aisha's initial goal, to arrive at her destination and share her ideas, was now entangled with an unforeseen obstacle. The incident had not only threatened her physical journey, but also her personal dignity and her professional reputation. The flight attendant in charge, a stern woman named Layla, soon made her way through the cabin. Her expression was resolute as she calmly informed everyone that, due to the escalating disturbance, a decision had been made by the airline to address the situation immediately upon landing. Layla explained that protocol required the resolution of any conflict before allowing passengers to continue their journey, hinting that certain individuals might have to disembark for further questioning. Her words, though delivered in a measured tone, carried an undercurrent of inevitability that made it clear nothing would be the same once the plane touched down. Aisha's eyes filled with a mix of determination and sorrow as she listened. Despite the pain and humiliation of the slap, she understood that she now faced an obstacle that threatened everything she had worked for. The thought of missing her conference, of losing the chance to connect with her peers and share her message, filled her with dread. Yet, beneath that dread was a flicker of resolve, a quiet promise to herself that she would not let this incident define her. The murmurs among the passengers grew louder as the implications of the announcement sank in. Some whispered in sympathy with Aisha, while others exchanged heated looks with Mia, whose own internal conflict was now laid bare for all to see. The cabin had become a microcosm of the larger world, a place where personal grievances and societal tensions converged, forcing each person to confront uncomfortable truths. In that cramped space, identities were not just a matter of personal pride, but symbols of broader struggles that had long simmered beneath the surface. Among the secondary characters, a young woman named Sarah, traveling alone and clearly anxious about the unfolding drama, approached Aisha with a soft, tentative voice. Sarah introduced herself as a journalist, her notebook clutched tightly in her hands, and expressed both concern and curiosity about what had happened. Her questions were gentle but probing, hinting at a desire to understand the deeper issues that had led to this moment. Sarah's presence added another layer of complexity to the situation, suggesting that the incident was not just a personal clash, but a story with far-reaching implications. As the flight continued, Mr. Rahim took it upon himself to mediate the growing tension between the parties. He spoke softly with Mia, urging her to reflect on the reasons behind her actions and to consider the long-term consequences of letting anger dictate her behavior. In a quiet corner of the cabin, his words seemed to soothe her, if only slightly, and the hardened expression on her face began to show the first signs of cracking. Yet the obstacle remained. The irreversible act had been committed, and its fallout was now the barrier between Aisha's aspirations and the reality of the moment. The storm outside intensified, its relentless fury a fitting backdrop for the inner turmoil of everyone on board. Each flash of lightning and roll of thunder served as a reminder that life's unpredictable forces could upend even the most carefully laid plans. For Aisha, the growing chaos signaled that her path forward was about to be obstructed by forces beyond her control, forces that would force her to confront not only the immediate humiliation, but also the systemic issues that had long divided people. In the midst of this escalating crisis, Layla's final announcement over the intercom left no room for ambiguity. Upon landing, an official investigation would commence, and those directly involved in the conflict would be subject to immediate action. The gravity of her words sank into every heart on board, and it became apparent that Aisha, despite being the victim of the assault, would face the brunt of the fallout. The airline's protocols, it seemed, did not account for the complexities of human behavior. They treated every disturbance as a threat to order. As the plane began its descent toward the runway, Aisha felt a cold shiver of foreboding. Her carefully laid plans were unraveling, and the obstacle before her was not just a moment of personal pain, but a challenge to the very principles she had held dear. The unfolding drama on the flight was far from over. With the descent now underway, the tension in the cabin was matched only by the tempest raging outside. The faces of the passengers told stories of empathy, judgment, and uncertainty, each one reflecting a piece of the larger puzzle. In this confined space, personal identities collided with institutional protocols, and every whispered conversation hinted at the storm of consequences that would soon break over them all. Aisha, grappling with a mixture of fear and resolve, clutched her bag tighter. The obstacle had been revealed in stark detail. Her journey was no longer simple transit from one city to another, but a battle against forces that sought to silence her voice and undermine her mission. In that moment, as the plane's wheels touched the tarmac, the reality set in. Her destiny was now irrevocably linked to the events that had unfolded in the sky. The turning point was here, and the road ahead would force her to navigate not only the immediate fallout, but also the deep-seated issues that had ignited the conflict in the first place. The plane's interior had shifted into a charged, almost palpable tension. The storm outside raged on, lightning intermittently illuminating the cabin in ghostly flashes. In that eerie light, faces turned toward one another with raw vulnerability and a silent acknowledgement that nothing would ever be the same. The earlier incident had carved deep lines of conflict and regret into both Mia and Aisha, and now the escalating moment demanded that these inner turmoils be laid bare. Mia stood near the rear of the cabin, her posture rigid as if bracing against an unseen wind. Her eyes, dark and troubled, flickered with the residue of anger and sorrow. In the minutes following the confrontation, she had retreated into herself, her mind a tumult of self-recrimination and uncertainty about the future. But as the plane shuddered through another burst of turbulence, a deeper realization began to dawn on her. The emotions she had long suppressed were now not only a threat to her professional identity, but also a signal of something more profound within her. The SLAP, impulsive and irreversible, was only the surface of wounds that had festered for years, a betrayal of her own hopes to be recognized as more than the sum of past injustices. At the same time, Aisha sat quietly by the window, her gaze lost in the storm beyond. The rhythmic drumming of rain against the glass seemed to echo her inner heartbeat, a steady, insistent reminder of both pain and resolve. Though still reeling from the shock, a spark of determination lit within her. She recalled the moments in her classroom when a simple act of courage from a student had transformed fear into confidence. Now she found herself at a crossroads, forced to choose whether to let this violation of her dignity define her or to rise above it. The storm, with its relentless fury, had become a mirror of her inner world, each flash of lightning marking an epiphany, every roll of thunder a call to action. It was then that Mr. Rahim reappeared, as if summoned by fate. His presence, warm and steady, drew both women's attention. He approached slowly, his eyes filled with a compassionate understanding that transcended the immediate chaos. "Sometimes," he said in a gentle yet firm tone, "the most painful disruptions force us to confront truths we have long avoided." His words resonated in the charged air, and for a moment, the cabin felt like a sanctuary for introspection rather than a battlefield of raw emotions. Mia, who had been hovering on the edge of isolation, met his gaze with a mix of defiance and despair. In that instant, Mr. Rahim's eyes seemed to read the story etched on her face, a story of betrayal by fate and the painful burden of being judged for scars that time had barely healed. His next words were soft but carried the weight of profound wisdom. "Your anger is not your enemy, Mia," is a signal, a cry for healing. But healing begins with acknowledging the hurt, not letting it blind you to the possibility of change. As the storm outside intensified, so did the confrontation within. Aisha, emboldened by her own rising inner strength, shifted her focus from the shock of the earlier assault to the opportunity for transformation. With a quiet resolve, she spoke, her voice steady despite the tremor of emotion. "I refuse to be defined solely by that moment," she said. "Yes, I was struck, but I am more than this hurt. I have spent my life nurturing minds, encouraging growth, even when the world around me wanted to keep me down. I will not let one act of violence erase all that I stand for." Her words, carried by the low hum of the engines and punctuated by the distant crashes of thunder, reverberated through the cabin. The passengers, huddled in their own clusters of fear and empathy, listened in a collective silence. Some faces softened, while others wore the hardened expressions of those who had borne witness to too many injustices. In that charged silence, alliances began to form. Sarah, the young journalist who had earlier approached Aisha with tentative questions, now stepped forward. Her eyes, filled with earnest determination, met Mia's as she spoke up. "I want to understand your story too. We all have our battles, and sometimes our actions hurt the very people we wish to protect. But we must find a way to bridge these divides rather than let them widen." Her words were not accusatory. Rather, they were an invitation, a plea for empathy and mutual understanding. Mia's response was a complex blend of vulnerability and defiance. She looked down, as if trying to reconcile her past with the person she wished to be. In that moment, the symbolism of the storm outside took on a new meaning. The tempest was not merely a backdrop, but a living metaphor for the chaos of unresolved pain and the possibility of renewal. Each flash of lightning was a reminder that even the darkest moments could illuminate hidden truths, and each rumble of thunder echoed the call to confront what lay beneath the surface. As the conversation unfolded, subtle betrayals began to surface. A voice from the back of the cabin, one that had remained silent until now, spoke up with quiet intensity. It was Layla, the stern manager of the cabin crew, whose duty was to restore order, but whose heart was not untouched by the unfolding drama. "We must remember," she said, "that the protocols we follow sometimes fail to address the complexities of human emotion. This is not merely a matter of discipline, but of understanding the deep wounds that drive us to act in ways we later regret." Her words, carrying the weight of institutional experience and personal insight, resonated with both Mia and Aisha. For a fleeting moment, the rigid boundaries between authority and the human heart softened. The atmosphere shifted palpably as the group began to see each other not as adversaries, but as individuals caught in the maelstrom of fate. In that crucible of high stakes and raw emotion, alliances were formed, not through unanimous agreement, but through the mutual recognition of shared vulnerability. Mia, who had once been isolated in her internal torment, found herself hesitating on the precipice of change. With trembling hands and a cautious heart, she whispered, "I never meant for it to go this far. I've been fighting against a tide that I thought I could control, but now I see that I must confront my past if I am to have any hope for the future." Her admission was a turning point, a fragile, tentative step toward acknowledging her own pain and the possibility of healing. In that moment, the sensory details of the storm became emblematic of their inner states. The relentless patter of rain on the fuselage was like the rhythm of a heart trying to steady itself, while the sharp, sudden bursts of wind mirrored the unpredictable outbursts of repressed emotions. The scent of damp fabric and the sterile tang of metal blended with the palpable tension, creating an atmosphere that was both oppressive and, paradoxically, liberating in its brutal honesty. The cabin, once a confined space of enforced civility, now transformed into a crucible where raw truths were laid bare. With each word exchanged, the air grew heavier with the promise of change. The revelation that none of them could simply revert to the comfort of denial struck like another bolt of lightning, illuminating the darkest corners of their hearts. In that charged space, Mia and Aisha, once defined solely by their roles as flight attendant and teacher, emerged as complex individuals with histories of pain, resilience, and the capacity for growth. As the plane continued its journey, the midpoint of their shared ordeal marked a decisive shift. The stakes were higher now, not just for the individuals involved, but for the larger narrative of understanding and redemption that each person represented. The alliances forged in those fraught moments, the subtle betrayals acknowledged, and the personal revelations shared became the underpinnings of a new path forward. It was a moment where the painful past and the uncertain future collided, urging each of them to choose between the comfort of familiar sorrow and the daunting possibility of transformation. In the dim, flickering cabin light, and against the backdrop of a storm that refused to subside, the silent promise of change was made manifest. Each character, marked by their unique scars and hopes, was now irrevocably linked in a tapestry of human frailty and strength. And as the plane sailed on through the turbulent night, it was clear that the true journey, one of healing, understanding, and courageous self-discovery, was only just beginning. The airplane was beginning its final descent, and the tension that had been simmering for hours now seemed to crackle in the very air around the passengers. Outside, the storm continued to rage, with sheets of rain pelting the fuselage and lightning briefly revealing the anxious faces of those on board. In the cabin, the aftermath of the earlier conflict still hung heavy, and every whispered conversation carried the weight of unspoken fears. Aisha sat in her seat, her eyes fixed on the dwindling horizon, when an unexpected jolt shook the narrow space. In that moment of turbulence, her worn leather bag, her constant companion, tumbled from her lap and fell to the floor with a muted thud. The bag's sudden fall caused a minor commotion as it spilled its contents across the aisle. Among the scattered papers and personal mementos lay a thick envelope, its edges worn and documents peeking out from underneath. For a split second, time seemed to slow. The envelope, long hidden away, now lay exposed in the harsh fluorescent light of the cabin. A hushed murmur swept through the nearby rows as a few curious passengers bent down to retrieve the fallen items. Sarah, the young journalist who had earlier approached Aisha with gentle questions, was the first to pick up one of the documents. Her eyes widened as she skimmed over the printed pages, and she exchanged a startled look with another passenger seated beside her. These are important," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else, her voice trembling with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Aisha's heart skipped a beat as she realized what had just happened. Those documents were not ordinary. They were fragments of a past she had desperately tried to keep separate from her professional life. In her quiet moments before the flight, she had pored over these papers, revisiting memories of protests, secret meetings, and a time when her voice had been loud enough to demand change. They were the proof of her involvement in a cause that had once challenged a powerful institution, a part of her history that she had hidden away to protect her career and the safety of her loved ones. Now, in this moment of vulnerability, her past was being thrust into the glaring light of the present. Mia, who had been standing silently by a row of seats, noticed the commotion and hurried over. Her eyes darted between Aisha and the unfolding scene. The storm outside had given way to a charged stillness inside the cabin, and every detail seemed magnified. Mr. Rahim, ever the mediator, stepped forward as well, his calm presence attempting to restore order. "Please, let's keep calm," he said softly, his voice a gentle plea against the rising tide of panic. "There's no need for this to spiral further." But Sarah's eyes remained fixed on the documents in her hand. "Aisha, what is this?" she asked, her tone a blend of curiosity and concern. The question cut through the heavy silence, and all eyes turned to the teacher. Aisha's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and fear. She hesitated, her mind racing to find the right words to explain the contents that now threatened to change everything. In that charged moment, the airplane's interior seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as the past and present collided. The envelope contained evidence of organized efforts, clandestine meetings, and personal sacrifices, evidence that could tarnish the pristine image Aisha had cultivated over the years. For someone who had always been a pillar of strength in her community, the revelation of this secret was a monumental blow. It wasn't merely about the scandal or the risk of professional ruin. It was the painful reminder of a time when her ideals had forced her into dangerous territories, when her fight for justice had come at great personal cost. Mia's eyes flickered with a complexity of emotions as she watched Aisha struggle. In that instance, the conflict between them took on a new dimension, one that was not simply about a momentary lapse of control, but the manifestation of deeper wounds. I never meant for you to be caught in this," Aisha began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Those papers, they're from a time when I had to fight for what I believed in, even when it meant facing my own demons." Her words trembled with regret and sorrow. The air around her felt heavier with the burden of secrets long buried, now clawing their way into the open. The unexpected twist sent shockwaves through the cabin. Passengers who had once been mere onlookers now exchanged glances filled with disbelief and empathy. Mr. Rahim stepped closer, his gaze soft yet penetrating. "Aisha," he said, "sometimes the past is a part of who we are. It may not be easy, but perhaps this is an opportunity for you to reclaim that part of yourself, one that can strengthen you rather than weaken you." His words were a balm, yet they did little to dispel the fear that gripped her heart. Sarah, a notebook in hand, continued to probe gently. "These documents hint at something much larger than we initially thought. They reveal your involvement in a movement that challenged injustice, a movement that many would see as controversial." Her voice was measured, trying not to betray the internal turmoil of her own thoughts. Have you ever regretted that part of your life, or do you see it as a necessary struggle for change? Her question, though not hostile, was loaded with implications. Aisha looked around, noticing how the atmosphere had shifted. Some passengers leaned forward, eager for details, while others cast sympathetic glances in her direction. The cabin, already scarred by the earlier violence, now resonated with a new intensity. The revelation of her secret was an unexpected twist that threatened to redefine not just her identity, but the entire course of events on this flight. Every rumble of thunder outside seemed to echo her internal conflict, every flash of lightning illuminating the raw vulnerability in her eyes. Meanwhile, Mia felt a surge of conflicted emotions. She had been the aggressor just moments ago, and now she was witnessing the fallout of a secret she had no part in. Yet, beneath her own layers of regret and guilt, there was a budding understanding of the weight Aisha had carried all these years. "I'm sorry," Mia managed to say softly, her voice laden with remorse. "I never wanted to cause you harm beyond what already existed." Her apology, simple as it was, hung in the air like a fragile truce, a reminder that sometimes even the most turbulent storms could lead to moments of clarity. As the descent continued, the mounting challenges became more apparent. The airline's protocols, already strict, now had to contend with a scandal that was evolving in real time. Layla, the cabin crew manager, arrived with a composed yet troubled look. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for landing. I must ask everyone to remain seated as we transition to the next phase of this journey," she announced over the intercom. Her tone was calm but carried the unmistakable hint of an impending investigation, not just into the earlier incident, but into this new, explosive development. The unexpected twist had not only forced Aisha to confront her past, but also placed her in the center of a conflict that threatened to engulf her future. The realization that her carefully guarded secrets were now public knowledge was a blow from which recovery would not be simple. Yet, amid the rising tension, there was also a strange sense of possibility. Perhaps in the unveiling of her hidden self, there lay the chance for true liberation, a chance to integrate every part of her being, both light and shadow. In that moment, the airplane itself became a crucible of transformation. The storm outside, relentless and wild, mirrored the inner maelstrom of each character. The spilled papers, fluttering like scattered leaves in a gust of wind, symbolized the fragmentation of identities and the challenge of piecing oneself back together. And as the aircraft continued its descent toward the uncertain safety of the runway, each individual on board faced the prospect of an arrival that was no longer just a destination, but a turning point in a journey marked by unexpected truths and the courage to embrace them. For Aisha, the second turning point had arrived with the harsh clarity of reality. The mounting challenges, the exposure of her hidden past, and the fragile alliances forming around her all signaled that nothing would ever be the same again. And as the wheels of the plane touched down, the storm outside and the storm within converged into a single, unforgettable moment of reckoning, a moment that would forever change the trajectory of her life. The airplane touched down with a heavy thud, the wheels skidding slightly as they met the tarmac. In that charged moment, the storm outside seemed to echo the chaos within the cabin. The rain pounded against the windows, and the low rumble of thunder provided a relentless, ominous soundtrack to the unfolding events. Passengers, still reeling from the turbulence of emotions earlier in the flight, exchanged anxious glances as the aircraft slowly taxied toward the terminal. Aisha remained seated, her eyes fixed on the dark horizon visible through the small window. The secret documents that had spilled from her bag earlier lay hidden beneath her seat, a stark reminder of a past she had long tried to bury. The revelation of those papers had shattered the delicate facade of her composed life, and now, as the plane came to stop, she felt the weight of every secret pressing down on her. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a mix of fear, regret, and a burgeoning resolve. This was the moment where everything would be laid bare. Mia, too, was caught in the vortex of her own emotions. The anger and regret that had led her to lash out on the flight had not subsided. Instead, they had coalesced into a heavy, almost unbearable sorrow. As the cabin doors opened, she stood motionless for a moment, the cold air from the terminal rushing in and mingling with the stale tension of the aircraft. The silence between her and Aisha was thick, laden with unspoken apologies and the bitter taste of what could never be undone. Stepping off the plane, the passengers were met by a flurry of activity. Officials and airline staff moved briskly through the terminal, their expressions serious and unsmiling. Among them was Mr. Rahim, whose calm presence had served as a tentative bridge between the conflicting souls during the flight. Now he moved purposefully toward Aisha and Mia, his eyes reflecting a deep concern for both of them. "We must address what happened," he said quietly, his voice steady as he guided them toward a private area away from the curious onlookers. Inside a small, brightly lit room, the air was tense with anticipation. The storm outside continued its relentless assault, the sound of rain and thunder seeping through the walls. Here, in this confined space, the true climax of the journey was about to unfold. Aisha sat on a hard plastic chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, as she tried to steady herself. Her eyes, though clouded with pain, burned with a quiet determination. Today, she would confront not only the consequences of her revealed past, but also the forces that had driven her to fight for what she believed in. Mia hesitated at the doorway, her silhouette framed by the harsh fluorescent light. The sight of Aisha, vulnerable yet resolute, pierced through the layers of guilt that had built up over the past few hours. With a deep, shuddering breath, she stepped into the room. "Aisha," she began softly, her voice trembling, "I am so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you like that. I lost control of my anger, and I regret it deeply." Her words fell into the charged silence like fragile drops of rain against a parched earth. Aisha looked up, her eyes reflecting both the pain of the past and the hope for a future beyond it. "Mia, I know your anger comes from a place of deep hurt," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor of emotion behind it. "But what happened on that flight, what we all witnessed, it is a moment that will haunt us for a long time. I have carried these secrets for so long, and now they are out. I fear that this may ruin everything I have worked for." Her admission was raw and honest, a desperate plea for understanding in a moment of vulnerability. Mr. Rahim, ever the mediator, stepped between them. "Sometimes the truth is painful, and our actions in moments of anger can lead us down paths we never intended," he said, his tone gentle yet firm. "But it is also in these moments that we are given a chance to grow, to mend the fractures that have divided us." His words seemed to hang in the air, offering both comfort and a challenge to face the consequences head-on. Outside, the storm reached a fevered pitch, the wind howling and the rain lashing against the glass. The sensory onslaught mirrored the tumultuous emotions in the room. Aisha closed her eyes briefly, as if seeking solace in the rhythm of the storm. When she opened them again, they shone with a determination that surprised even her. "I must come to terms with my past," she declared softly, "if I am to move forward. I fought for justice, for the rights of those who were silenced, and that fight has defined who I am. I cannot erase it, even if it puts me at risk now." Her words were not a justification, but an acceptance of the complexities of her own identity. Mia nodded, her own eyes glistening with tears. "I understand now that my anger was not just about that moment on the flight," she confessed. "It was about years of feeling powerless, of being dismissed because of who I am. I see that my pain has led me to lash out, and for that, I am deeply sorry." In that admission, there was a flicker of hope, a possibility for healing through honesty and empathy. The dialogue between them deepened as Mr. Rahim facilitated a conversation that peeled back layers of hurt and misunderstanding. They spoke of the silent battles they had both fought, Aisha, with her secret history of resistance and the sacrifices she had made, and Mia, with her struggles against the prejudice and isolation that had haunted her from childhood. In that small room, amidst the pounding rain and flickering lights, the two women began to see each other not as adversaries, but as kindred spirits caught in the relentless grip of their own pasts. A twist came unexpectedly when one of the officials entered the room with a terse expression. "Miss Aisha," the official said, addressing her directly, "we have received a call from your old college. They have evidence supporting your claims of past activism and the subsequent fallout. It seems that your actions, once considered controversial, are now being recognized as part of a larger movement for justice." The revelation fell like a sudden gust of wind, altering the course of the conversation. The official's words confirmed what Aisha had long feared, that her past was not a burden to be hidden, but a testament to the sacrifices made in the name of progress. In that moment, Aisha felt a shift within her. The documents, once a source of shame, became symbols of resilience and the hard-won battles of her youth. The official's words, though delivered with the cold detachment of bureaucracy, sparked a transformation in her. "So, my past, it is not entirely a curse?" she asked quietly, her voice wavering between hope and disbelief. Mr. Rahim smiled gently. "Your past is part of you, and it has made you the strong, determined person you are today. Instead of being a source of regret, let it be a source of strength." His words resonated deeply, echoing in the stillness of a room as the storm outside began to subside. Mia reached out tentatively, placing a hand on Aisha's shoulder. "I want to help you, to make amends for my actions. I want to learn from you and be better." The simple gesture carried the promise of reconciliation, a recognition that healing often begins with forgiveness. As the official left the room, the air grew lighter, as if the oppressive storm had finally given way to a dawn of understanding. The climax of their ordeal had arrived not with a final confrontation, but with the quiet realization that even the deepest wounds could mend with time, empathy, and courage. Aisha took a deep breath, the taste of rain and hope mingling in the cool air, and allowed herself to forgive, not just Mia, but also herself. The final moments in that small room were filled with a sense of resolution. The once unbearable tension had transformed into a fragile but promising bond. The storm had raged, secrets had been unveiled, and the paths of two very different lives had collided. Now, in the aftermath of the emotional tempest, there was the possibility of new beginnings, a chance to redefine their identities and embrace the full spectrum of who they were. In that charged space, as the echoes of the storm slowly faded into memory, both women understood that the true journey was just beginning. The painful past, the mistakes made in moments of intense emotion, and the revelations that threatened to shatter their lives had all led them to this singular moment of clarity. And with that clarity came the strength to step forward, together, into an uncertain but hopeful future. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a cool, tentative calm that seemed to wash over the airport terminal as morning light began to seep through the glass walls. Aisha stepped out of the small meeting room with a measured pace, her eyes fixed ahead as if searching for something in the distance. The weight of her past, the secret documents, the scandal, and the raw emotions of the flight, still pressed on her, yet with each step she felt a subtle easing. The revelation of her hidden activism, once a source of fear and shame, had now transformed into a quiet badge of honor. In the soft light of dawn, Aisha realized that the struggle she had endured had not diminished her. It had, instead, forged her into someone even stronger. Mia, trailing a few paces behind, carried an aura of remorse and cautious hope. Her earlier outburst, driven by years of internalized pain and unhealed wounds, had unleashed a chain of events that neither could have foreseen. Now, as she walked beside Aisha, the silence between them spoke, louder than any apology. It was a silence laden with understanding, regret, and the possibility of redemption. Mia's eyes darted back and forth between Aisha's resolute expression and the gentle glow of the early morning, silently vowing to learn from the past and make amends where words had once failed. Outside the terminal, the cool air mixed with the lingering scent of rain and fresh earth. A group of onlookers, passengers, staff, and even a few curious officials watched the two women with expressions that blended empathy and cautious optimism. The earlier chaos of the flight had given way to a shared moment of vulnerability and transformation. In that collective pause, there was an unspoken recognition that what had happened was more than a personal conflict. It was a mirror reflecting broader wounds and the possibility of healing them. Mr. Rahim, whose calm mediation had been the anchor during the storm, stepped forward from the crowd. His warm eyes and gentle smile were a quiet reminder that forgiveness and growth often begin with a single, honest conversation. "Sometimes," he said softly to those gathered, "the hardest battles we fight are within ourselves. But it is in facing those battles that we discover who we truly are." His words resonated, offering a bridge between the past and the future, a promise that even the deepest scars could pave the way for renewal. Inside the terminal, in a quiet corner away from the bustling crowd, Aisha found a moment to sit and reflect. The documents that had once threatened to shatter her carefully constructed identity were now folded neatly in her bag, a tangible reminder of the life she had lived, a life of activism, sacrifice, and the pursuit of justice. As she traced the worn edges of the envelope with her fingertips, she recalled the long nights spent planning protests, the whispered conversations in hidden corners, and the fiery determination that had propelled her forward despite all odds. Each memory, painful as it was, had contributed to the person standing before the world now, a person unafraid to embrace every facet of her identity. Mia approached slowly, her voice hesitant yet earnest. "Aisha, I know I can never undo what happened," she began, her words trembling with sincerity, "but I want you to know that I'm here, and I'm willing to learn and change. I see now that my anger was not just about that moment, it was about the pain I've carried for so long. I'm truly sorry for the hurt I caused you." Her eyes, glistening with unshed tears, met Aisha's, seeking not just forgiveness, but an opportunity for mutual understanding. Aisha looked at Mia for a long moment, the silence between them filled with the echoes of the past and the promise of a new beginning. "I appreciate your apology," Aisha finally said, her voice steady and calm. "I've spent so much time trying to hide a part of who I am, and today, that secret was laid bare. I used to think that admitting my past would only bring ruin, but maybe it's part of what makes me strong." Her words were not merely an acceptance of her history, they were a declaration of self-acceptance, a turning point where vulnerability transformed into courage. Their conversation, quiet and intimate, drew the attention of a few nearby passengers who had once been silent witnesses to the unfolding drama. Among them was Sarah, the young journalist whose curiosity had sparked the initial chain of revelations. She approached with a respectful distance, her notebook clutched in one hand as if ready to record the turning tide of the moment. "Miss Aisha," Sarah said softly, "what you shared today, it's more than a story of conflict. It's a story of resilience. I think many would find hope in your honesty." Her words, sincere and unforced, carried the weight of a promise that the truth, however painful, could lead to healing.